We hear the world before we are born into it. And our reaction to sound may be more intense because of this. Most of us think of music as primarily an oral phenomenon. Pitches of sound, ordered in time, that affect our emotional state to differing degrees. But researchers at Edinburgh University are working on a theory about music's intimate connections to a more basic function: movement.
All skilled, purposeful movements consist in closing gaps of one form or another. It's going from one state to another state. And the important thing is how you go across between one state and the other state. And the theory deals with that. It addresses that particularly. And what's come up in the experiments is that the guiding force, as it were, the guiding pattern for a movement, a skill movement, is what we call a tau G function in the brain. It's a particular pattern which has a mathematical formula.
We're kind of like the Toyota Lexus of animals. We're kind of not really great at anything, but we can do anything. So we have the ability to move our bodies in any way we can. We can learn to. So we can develop into gymnasts or racing drivers or darts players, all quite different types of skilled movement. But we're not predisposed to do any, but we have the ability to develop these skills. And it's that plasticity of control over how you move that also means that we can take movement from its kind of functional getting about, doing things, walking about in the world, to saying, well, let's sculpt sound with music, or let's paint, use it to create art and play with it. And so it's art and music are kind of a celebration of how we move and how we control our movement.
The reason why we respond in this way is because at the root of music is movement, and the brain is basically constructed to control movement. The root of life is really movement. And therefore, what you're tapping into with the music is the movement system in the brain that is used for all sorts of things, but in this particular case, it may be used to express feeling through dance or through gesture.
You've got a musician and they want to play something, express something. And so they have to move in a certain way, and they make a sound that the dancer has to hear, and they move in a certain way. And so by measuring the movements that the musician makes, the sound they produce, and the movements the dancers make, you should then be able to pick out this gesture, this expression, this form from the movements in the sound, and also back into the body. The actual playing of an instrument relies on you being able to understand the same things. So the way that the movements are being controlled, the way that the person is actually moving to make the sound, you can perceive because you move in the same way and you have a similar body, and you can understand it as human, as something that you feel. And so if there were any different, music wouldn't be any fun. Certain music is perhaps more direct, possibly because the people are actually moving as well when they do it. So a lot of performers in contemporary or R&B or funk and these kind of things, they're actually dancing on stage whilst they're doing it, or if they're playing, you can feel them moving, you can see them moving in their bodies. Whereas with, say, a lot of more complex music, you get into a situation where you have passages that you're trying to play that are so complicated that if you're rolling about all over the place, you won't be able to play them. You have to be still to be able to actually get it out. You have to really focus so much of your kind of attention and your physical skill on being able to articulate, this very, complicated, fast piece of Rachmaninoff or whatever it is. If you start kind of getting into it and, giving a bit of Stevie Wonder with your head or whatever, it's gonna be more difficult for you. So I think that's the kind of the trade-off. You know, sometimes people can write things that are maybe so difficult to play that it's not possible to really get into it whilst you're playing it. You have to really, all of the movement is really in the, you know, the making of the sound. Whereas with other musics, people kind of have to, they move whilst they're doing it, and then that colours the whole thing even more, particularly in performance.
So how do scientists analyse an activity like playing music?
What we will do is to put little reflecting spots onto relevant bits of the body. You'd also record the sound in the normal sort of way. The reflective spots are seen by a special system, which is called a qualisys system, which essentially takes the three-dimensional position of those spots and puts those three-dimensional positions into the computer. And it does this very rapidly at, say, 500 times a second. And that enables us to analyze on the computer the exact form of a movement. And we analyze them to see whether this tau G pattern appears in the sound, and secondly, whether the pattern, the actual particular pattern of the tau G is the same in the two. And what we find is that it is.
What we're really trying to measure quantitatively in a measure of neural control really is how an idea gets from the mind of one musician, a pianist say, down through his fingers, into sound, into the mind of another musician through his ears, and then back out through his fingers, say, into his drumsticks, and into the noise of a cymbal. Now, it sounds quite abstract, but it's very easy to pick up on as an individual listening to it. You can hear a motif or a gesture in one part of a performance, and then you can hear that same pattern coming through, say, in the ride cymbal somewhere from keyboard to drums. And there's something that's very recognisable about it, but it's a very different sound. So you have the difference between a keyboard sound and a cymbal. But what is important is the shape is the same, the pattern is the same, and it's the pattern of movement involved in producing it and the way that it's controlled that's the same. And what we're really talking about here is directly measuring expression or gestural aspects of performance, and that's something that's never really been measured before in a quantitative way, in some way that you can really pin it down and say, this is what it is, and this is where it started, and this is where it finished up. And we're really very excited about that. reason to play music is just to play music and just to do it. If you can make a living out of it, great. And that's a reality which is very hard to achieve. But the reason why most children play music initially, the reason why a 3-year-old will pick up a tambourine and just start banging it, is just to make a sound. And it's rewarding, and for many reasons, because it just celebrates this ability to do things and to make noise.